big thing about the climate science, for one, it's been a very short amount of time when compared to the time frame of human history that we've actually been able to record in-depth weather information. So, like I said to you a minute ago before we were recording, we're looking at like less than 100 years since we've been using sondes, which are basically the things from Twister that they made out of pop cans where they got sucked up by the tornado. That's a sonde. So basically it records wind speed, direction, humidity, stuff like that. And it goes into the atmosphere. Yeah, all those things. That technology is relatively new in the scope of human history. So we have very limited data on that level through recorded human history. Also, satellites are not that new. So we haven't had satellite data at all, which we get a lot of weather information from satellite data, like a shit ton of it. Most of my forecasts were based on comparing model generations to what the satellite image is doing and things like that. So while we do have historical record as far as there was a big storm, there's no way to quantify that past 100 years ago, right?
No, I agree, but what we can do, and I'm sure you know this, is like correlate something like seawater temperatures and sea levels and carbon dioxide atmosphere concentration, things like that, which we do have record going back,
So you're talking about a broader scope of the entire thing. I'm specifically speaking right now to the intensity of the hurricanes that you mentioned. And my only point to that is we have seen an increase in strength, but we have no way of knowing what the actual natural cycle of hurricanes is, particularly in North America. So using that as a data point, it can help you to an extent, but we can't see more than 100 years back. So using that as evidence, quote unquote, for any significant impact isn't really the best method. So yeah, seawater temperature is definitely important as well. But as far as hurricanes go, it's really hard to use that, and it's a really frustrating one for me to hear from a lot of people that don't know dick about weather, because they just don't know what they're talking about.
I will agree with you that we don't have, a perfect record of what the hurricane cycle is going back thousands of years, but what we do know is that these different factors affect hurricane strength and intensity, frequency, that sort of thing, and it is on an uptrend. So while you can't say, there's a 100% causation between, greenhouse gases and climate change and these frequencies of weather events or strengthening of intensity, there is a very, very strong correlation. Would you agree with that?
As far as temperature of the water and intensity of hurricanes?
Yeah. I mean, sea levels
intensity,
going down,
yes, I would give you.
While water temperature goes up.
Well, I'll tell you right now, sea level going down would de-intensify a hurricane. Hurricanes need 70 feet of 70-degree water in order to intensify. So, I think it's 77 feet, actually. Sorry. Regardless. The lowering of sea levels does not intensify hurricanes.
Here's a counterpoint to that, though. Like, if sea level goes down...
Sea level's rising. No, I get it. I understand your argument. I'm just wanting to specify the parameters in which a hurricane does intensify.
But what also happens as a counterpoint, and honestly, this is probably a very minor point, just something that I wanted to point out, is that as your sea levels fall, you get closer to those ocean drop-offs, which mean that your energy reservoir from the ocean is much closer to your shoreline. And when I say much closer, it's obviously not that much closer, but there is some amount of, factor in the fact that
you would be talking miles, though, dude.
Yeah, and again, I agree. This is probably a minor thing, but
yeah, I think this would be negligible in a data set, to be completely honest with you. Now, there could be an argument that we could see more property damage from it because we've expanded further But the argument, that doesn't even work, because the argument is that sea levels are rising because we're global warming, so the ice caps are melting, thus raising the sea level. So this argument, I think, is just moot in general.
Yeah,
See what I'm saying?
that's a good point. I guess sea level is that was probably a bad interjection on my part, based on fluctuations in sea level and different
Now,
things.
I want to clarify my position.
Sea level fall and rise in the past 20
So
years.
I don't know that you and I have ever actually had this discussion as far as our opinions on climate change and how we handle it. I definitely think that climate change is occurring, mainly because climate change always occurs. The Earth is literally always searching for equilibrium, which it will never find, because it's a relatively warm and consistent ball floating through freezing cold space that gets exposed to super hot radiation at different angles, that also spins on an axis that is canted either to or away from the sun based on where it is in its why can't I think of the word? Orbit around the sun, right? So all of these factors are why we get weather. So is there a changing of climate? Yes, there always is. We have climatological data relatively far back. Nothing that's to the level we are now for most of human history, though. We have an actual database that the Navy maintains. We also have databases that NOAA maintains of actual weather observations done in the standard manner that we do today. Now, do I think human beings are having an impact on climate change? Also, yes. Is there any proof that I've seen? Now, there could be some out there that I haven't seen. And again, I'm not like a PhD in meteorology, but I would say I'm much more educated on weather than most people. Do I think that we are having as big of an impact as especially politicians and media would like us to believe? No, we are not. Do I think that it could potentially be a problem? Absolutely. Do I think it's something we should do something about? Absolutely. But do I think that completely shutting down our energy market in order to hope that China and Russia and India will do the same so we can bring down carbon emissions? I don't think that's the effective way to go about this. Interesting fact about weather, right? Most weather deaths, do you know what they're attributed to?
Yeah, I mean, most deaths that occur during things like hurricanes and flooding events are, secondary.
No, I mean weather in general.
What do you mean, like
so,
falling trees, power lines,
anything.
that kind of thing?
Anything that's weather affected, what kills the most people?
I don't know.
Don't think too hard about this.
Water.
Okay, so it's heat. Heat. More people die of heat-related things throughout time than have of hurricanes or tornadoes or anything like that, right? So you get your heat stroke, your dehydration, things like that, right? So why is it that in the past, since the Industrial Revolution, heat casualties have gone drastically down?
I would say advancements in medical and access to water and shelter and things like that.
That's a large portion of it. So the big ones are going to be medical treatment, and actually the air conditioning is a huge one. The ability to not only use Freon-based air conditioning, but also just fans and shit, right, have drastically cut down. As well as insulating houses better, the access to ice, that was pre-Industrial Revolution, but the rapid access to cooling.
I mean,
human
I would
innovation
argue
is basically
that
what I'm saying.
I would argue that widespread access to ice was definitely post-Industrial Revolution, but there was
I don't
some
think so,
access to
because
ice.
they were moving ice through the Great Lakes pre-Industrial Revolution. So I would say
that's why I said
relatively
widespread access.
Well, widespread at the time was the East Coast, right? So for its time, it was widespread. By today's standard, no, but there also wasn't nearly as many people settled across the entirety of the country. But we're getting into rabbit holes right now as far as semantics. But back to my point, human innovation is what I think is our way through climate change. And we and I say that kind of with a caveat, right? So I don't mean we just say, fuck this problem, burn everything forever, YOLO, right? That's not what I'm saying. What I mean is we need to figure out a solution for this. We need to get more nuclear facilities up. We need to figure out a way for carbon recapture, right? We need to plant more fucking trees is a big one. Trees are a natural carbon capture device that you literally plant it and walk away, and it does the thing for you for its entire life. And then when it gets too old and starts leaching too much nutrients and starving out of the trees in the area, you cut it down, which allows the other trees to grow up. You replant and you cycle it like that, right? We've been doing this for quite some time at this point as a country, and it's effective. Now, I think we should innovate while we worry about those other things, while we figure those other issues out that I mentioned. And it's just a much more feasible process. But to expect the entire world, where a lot of small, and especially poor third world countries, right, that can't afford solar panels, they can't afford wind farms, they're burning dung in their village, right, or they're burning wood, which is one of the highest carbon emissions fuel sources that we currently use as a species. All of these things, we need to get them up to speed as well, while also producing more green energy. And I don't think wind is currently the answer. I think the big three are nuclear, geothermal, and hydroelectric. But obviously, there's space in there for solar as well. Wind is just so expensive, and it generates so little.
Now,
as far as carbon emissions,
I just want to cut in here real quick and say that I'm a little bit surprised that when you brought that argument around, that you and I agree almost 100% on this topic. I think that the current climate change solutions, while meant to be kind of like a stopgap measure, they've gone on way too long. I mean, it's been over a decade now that we've been kind of using these same climate change, mitigation measures, and I don't think they're effective. I don't think they were ever effective. I think the carbon tax credit system was bullshit to begin with.
Yep.
I know it's something that you've talked about before, and I've never really gotten into it. When one of us kind of goes off on a tangent, it's hard to respond to every little bit that they say, but I do think nuclear is the solution. I somewhat disagree with you on wind energy. I think that wind energy can be harnessed appropriately, and we're even still today getting more efficient generators that can operate with a gear ratio sufficient for harnessing wind power. And it's been pretty well proven that these big wind farms can coexist with things like farmland. There's a big push against that right now. But I think with a little bit of working together, it would be totally fine. Solar panels, again, much more efficient than they were before. I think we'll probably get into that a little bit more with our topic today. But nuclear. I'm not a huge fan of hydroelectric as the current flavor of it stands, just based on my views on the environment and what that does to rivers. But you can divert some of that somehow, although water in the United States and the world abroad, that's a whole nother topic that we could get into. So
yeah.
So
I don't hate wind, to be clear. I don't think it's an effective tool in getting us out of this problem. So first off, it takes a massive amount of emissions to create and maintain wind farms. That's a kind of small caveat. My biggest issue with both solar and wind, solar less so, because you can place them and relatively consistent spots, though, is the consistency of wind. It's an issue that Texas found out when they had the big freeze. You just can't rely on wind to blow all the time because it doesn't. So you're only generating power when there's wind, right? So we can't run our economy on something that, even today, with all of the meteorological backing and history and knowledge that we have, we still cannot predict wind. We still cannot predict even wind direction 100%, let alone speed, gusts, consistent wind speeds, anything like that. So I don't think it's something that we can set up our power grid to rely on consistently. If we want to use it as a backup or like a tertiary system to also contribute but not at all take the brunt, fine. I think that money would be better spent elsewhere. Is my argument against wind.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think wind, again, another stopgap measure. Wind energy is not the solution, but as it stands right now, we don't really have a better renewable source of energy that can provide power at that scale. And it honestly, it uses that simple mechanism of spinning a magnet, right, to generate power. And the more energy you put into that, the more energy you get out. Solar just isn't on that level. Solar's great for powering something like a small house, or we see it all the time with street lights and things like that. But what really is,
they still use solar farms in the Southwest.
Yeah. Okay.
Arizona, Nevada, stuff like that. So
fair
you
enough.
could use it to subsidize a grid.
That can also contribute, but wind and solar are not something that's going to be powering your city as it stands right now.
No.
And what we need for that is more investment in nuclear power. One of the big things right now is small modular reactors, which the first design has been approved by the NRC. That this was several years ago. They have yet to build a working prototype that has been approved for operation. Commercial use. But when they do, I'll likely be jumping ship back into that industry because they're going to need people to run those reactors. But the wind thing, or I guess wind farms, I think they will largely become obsolete after that happens on a widespread level. But yeah,
I think they're already obsolete. I think that, again, the investment into them, it's also very difficult to sell wind energy, right? So that's another reason I think that we shouldn't even be messing with wind right now. I think it's pretty dumb, personally. Where, for example, oil and LNG, we can sell that. That's a commodity that we can take and sell it to other countries so that they can power their countries and thus make ours more prosperous monetarily.
Oh, absolutely. No, these renewable sources are almost entirely domestic products. You might be able to tap into your immediate neighbors, Mexico and Canada, but you're not selling that abroad.
There's not a Keystone pipeline for solar.
Yep. Anyway, so I had us hit record on that because we were having a really interesting discussion about climate change, and I thought that might be interesting to capture. So that is not the topic of today's episode. But before we get into the actual topic, how have you been?
I've been pretty good, man. Went to a family fun night at Amelia's school tonight. So that was a good time meeting, seeing all the kids and seeing some of the teachers. And it was so she's at, it's like a smaller sub school for daycare and preschool. And then she'll go to the elementary school for kindergarten. So we went to the elementary school for it. So it was cool seeing some of the facilities and some of the teachers and stuff like that. and they had like broken into rooms. I think there was 5 rooms, and each room had a different activity in it, so the kids got to play. There was a dance room, so Amelia went in there twice because she just loves dancing. So it was a fun time.
Nice.
What about you?
Yeah, I had a pretty relaxing weekend. Sarah went out and did some stuff with one of her childhood friends, reconnecting after us being away for almost a decade. So they went out and did, a little painting class, and then spent the night out. And then other than that, we kind of just stayed home and worked on some stuff around the house. And I'll say it's really the first weekend that I haven't gone out and done something adventurous since we moved back. So it was kind of nice for me.
Yeah, just sit back and relax, kind of.
Yeah, just hanging out with the kids and not worrying about driving halfway across the state to go do something, or pack the car, load everybody up, and not come back until Sunday evening. So that was good. And then other than that, just working and still enjoying what I do.
Nice.
But so anyway, the topic for today's episode is the vice presidential debate. So I think we both watched the entirety of it. I know I did. And
Same.
You sent me a message with your page of notes that you were taking. So I imagine we're going to have a good discussion. Do you want to go ahead and start out with some of your high level thoughts on this debate?
Yeah. So I sense that you and I disagree on this, based on your reluctancy to tell me who you thought won yesterday. I want to start with I don't think that this drastically changes the race, but I think it could drastically change the outcome of the race. And I'll explain that in a minute. But I think it's pretty clear that J.D. Vance won this debate from a debate standpoint. I think he did markedly better than Trump did. I think a lot of that goes down to, from both debates, the lawyer won. Right, so both of the backgrounds of the people that I think won both debates were both lawyers. They both literally argued for a living. So it makes sense to me. That being said, I think that Walz is... I think the two VP candidates are of different intellectual levels, and I think that's pretty obvious. I think that JD did a lot of things that were strategically good in debate. Whether or not I or his base agree with everything, I don't think anybody agrees with everything he said. But I also think that the moderators were not as bad as the presidential debate, but I definitely don't think they were good. Again, I think they asked more pointed questions towards JD, and they also bashed Trump in a couple of questions where they did not do that with Kamala Harris. But again, I expected that. This is a left-wing media site, media company, so it kind of makes sense to me as far as that goes. But nonetheless, I think JD won the debate. I think that this could change the outcome of the race, only because at this point they're vying for very small margins of votes, so they don't need nearly as many people to swing in order to affect the race, right? So I think at this point there's 5% undecided voters or something like that. So a 3% swing changes the outcome, right? And I think JD did a good job of smoothing off some of the sharp edges of the Trump-Vance ticket. I think a lot of people were really worried about who Trump is, and it was good to see JD be different. And lastly, and I think most importantly, this is the best debate I've seen in a long time. Definitely the best one I've watched, but I think it's the best one of my lifetime. I think it was very cordial, It seemed very professional. There was not a lot of personal attacks, if any. So I think it was good for America to have some kind of semblance of normal again. So
That's my wave tops, and I'm sure we can dig down on a lot of that.
Yeah, no, I pretty much agree with all of that. I do think from a debate strategy standpoint, JD won, and there's really no doubt about that. Like if this was Debate Club, and we were just talking about like who came off as the more eloquent speaker, who did a better job at articulating those thoughts and emotions better, while staying composed and having those strategic responses to questions, having it. I'll get to this in a second, but one of the things that JD Vance is very good at is rebuttals to what his opponent is saying, but it coming off in a way that he genuinely cares and understood the content of the speaker, and then incorporates that into his pre-planned response to the question, right? So I think that JD Vance kind of blew me away with how good he was at debating. Now, as far as like content and everything, I don't necessarily know if I agree with your statement about really getting that 5% of undecided voters to shift. And I have my notes, you have your notes, and I think we'll
I don't have my notes, but
well, I have my notes. You have a brain like a steel trap. So
I appreciate that.
We'll I'm sure we'll have some good discussion about about what the content of the debate was. But I think there were some really telling answers from both sides that honestly I think are gonna have people kind of dig in their heels for the side they were leaning towards in the first place. So again, although this was a wonderful debate to watch, from both a politics and a just somebody that enjoys watching people speak point of view, I don't necessarily think this is one that's going to change the outcome.
Okay. So I think your point on it, you don't think it's just going to make the people that were on their side stick their heels into their side more. I think you're right. But I'm not talking about the people, the MAGA voters or the never Trumpers or the I really don't even know what to call Democrats. Just because I feel like it's abundantly clear that they're voting for their party, not their person.
Well, I mean, no, you still have your different factions within the Democratic Party, right?
No, 100%. But I don't know what to call them, right? So what to call the locked in base. So like for Trump, I just call them MAGA Trump or Trumpers, right?
You
see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think the liberal vote is really just all in all going to Harris, just because that's a candidate, and she is, she's done a pretty good job of being kind of right in the middle of what the liberal base wants, right? Appealing to both that's your traditional liberal base as well as neoliberals and your progressives.
So that's something that I think both Kamala and Biden are very good at. At least Joe Biden was very good at throughout all of his career, and I think Kamala's good at it as well. Is they know how to find where the center of the party is and shift towards that. I don't think either of them particularly ran on their ideals. I think they ran on what they perceived the middle to be, and I think they're pretty accurate as far as what they perceive the middle of their party to be.
Yeah, and can I say something? Really quick on that point, unless you had a larger point you wanted to make there.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so we've had this discussion several times. I know we've had it on the podcast, so I'm not going to reiterate it in full, but essentially my stance is listen to the people, right? And as long as you can articulate what you're doing and say, hey, I'm doing this for the my constituents, I'm doing this for the voter base, this is what the people want, and here is why I think we should move this way, here's why my policy appeals to that, and why I think it's a good idea, right? I think that is a perfect embodiment of what leadership should be. With some caveats, obviously, like national security, and sometimes people in those higher levels have a much better picture of what's actually going on. But J.D. Vance in the debate said that with regard to abortion, that after they had, the Republican Party, right, state level, federal level, all of this had talked about abortion, the Supreme Court de facto overturning Roe v. Wade, all of this, and state level abortion bans and restrictions going into effect, that J.D. Vance said that he did a bunch of soul searching and he reflected on what people's thoughts and feelings and morals on that were, and he said, I reflected on that, did some soul searching, and this is what I've come up with, and I think that we need to take a step in this direction. If people could just say that about when they had a shift in policy based on what their constituents want, I think that would, as J.D. Vance said, earn back some trust with the people, right? Because when they flip,
I wholeheartedly agreed when he said
when
that.
they flip on certain issues, it's so easy for the media to just dig up an old clip of them saying something that completely contradicts with what they're saying now, and then the next media story is Vice President Harris flip-flops on this, Donald Trump reverses his stance on that, right? Like, if they can just come out and say why they're doing what they're doing, I think that would add some transparency and some trust to politics. And right now, honestly, criticism for the Democratic Party, I think that the Democratic Party is playing politics right now, and one of their big plays is that they don't think that they really have to explain anything like that, because they have the big bad of Donald Trump to be a counterweight to their campaign. So all they have to do is put out this message of hope. And, I will say that, the Harris campaign has put out some pretty good pieces of policy that, they're proposing.
Could you give me a couple examples?
I will in just a second.
Okay.
But as you've stated, they've been pretty scaled back on their interviews. They're not really talking
I think that's
to
an
these.
unfair understatement. They've done 3 at this point.
Yeah.
The opposition's done hundreds.
I don't think that it's an unfair understatement to say that they're very scaled back on their interviews, but especially
Well, you said
compared
a little
to.
scale back, but yeah, continue.
I'll take that. Hold on, let me regain my train of thought here.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to derail. I realized it as I said it.
I was like, shit.
Anyway, so they are kind of hinging on that as their big political play, right? Saying we don't really need to do all of that because we're going up against this, this person that we're portraying as a great evil to democracy, right? And we've talked about how whether or not we think that's a fair characteristic before, so we won't get into that. But
Actually, we will in a little bit because it came up in the debate. But continue.
Man, you did it again. Now no, but really, my whole point is that I think J.D. Vance did a great job of addressing his policy change, and then he kind of whiffed it on the wrap up there.
Yeah, I don't think his closing statement was great.
No, he could have really brought that back around, and if he had on that and a couple of other issues, I would definitely agree with you on maybe changing people's minds, winning over some people. But between some of his real non-answers or statements, and then the Trump-Harris debate, I think people are going to be pretty entrenched. And just to clarify, I think those undecided voters are already leaning one way or the other, and it's probably around a 50-50 split. So I don't think we're going to get much more than a percentage change out of those people.
So I think that onto your Democratic Party thing, as to why they're not answering questions, I think that part of it, I don't think it's exclusively this. I think part of it is exactly what you said, that they can hide behind Trump and just kind of hope everyone's like, yeah, this guy speaks crazy, I can't vote for him, right? But I think another part of it is that they're looking at the Republican caucus right now and how fractured it is. And the Democratic coalition is also pretty opposed to itself on quite a few different stances. And I think that that's the internet that's doing it. I think it happened to the Republicans first. But I think the diversity of information that everybody's getting nowadays, it's kind of impossible to hold yourself into one of two parties. That's also why I think the independent number of registered independents has skyrocketed, because it's, instead of everyone getting all of their information from the same 6 news sources, now people are pulling from 50 different news sources, right? So I think they're afraid of their coalition falling apart, and then becoming as fractious as the Republicans. And I think it's even more probable with Nancy Pelosi leaving that happens, because I think she was the glue that held the Democratic Party together, because she did her job well, as far as being speaker, right? She held the Democrats together by using the levers of funding in order to get what she needed to get done. But she's gone, so the glue is gone. They got to figure something else out for that. And they have, especially on this Israel-Gaza issue, I think the Democratic Party is pretty split on this, where I don't think the Republican Party is. And I think that was the first evidence to them. Which is another reason I think they're not explaining a lot of their policies, because they're going to upset part of their base regardless.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, and I will say right off the bat, I don't like Nancy Pelosi.
I don't like her as a politician,
Although,
but I think she did her job well as far as being Speaker of the House and controlling her party.
I don't like her in the same way that I don't like a lot of politicians, and that she just gives me that, like, kind of skeevy
The
feeling.
I think is what the kids say.
Yeah, she gives me the ick,
Ugh,
And,
doesn't that feel dirty saying?
especially when I look at how much money she's made in Congress,
Yep.
and some of the deals that her and her husband have made, especially during like the COVID times. Honestly, I think that all of those people should be prosecuted for insider trading. Although, spoiler alert,
It's never gonna happen.
Congress passed a law that said Congress is exempt from insider trading.
Yep.
Shocker.
It's crazy how that works, ain't it?
Yeah, interesting.
Also, like,
But,
it's
no,
weird
I-
that
They haven't
I-
brought up term limits.
I absolutely agree with. No, I do agree with term limits, but I also agree with what you said about her being, kind of the. You could say the hammer of the Democratic Party, keeping them together, keeping them in line, making sure they voted on party lines. It's something that, a good speaker should do. Although I wish that we could see a little bit more bipartisanship with a lot of these issues, but for some reason we're making every single issue partisan line vote, when really it should be how can we work together to make sure that we're benefiting the American people and we're balancing our ideals. And honestly, if you want to earn back Americans' trust, make Congress work again. Make them pass laws that they can both say, we compromised on this, here's why I think it upholds our standards, and the Democrats can say, here's why I think it upholds our standards, while giving concessions to say the budget and these other things, pass gun control laws that Republicans can proudly say this does not infringe on our Second Amendment rights, and Democrats can proudly say this is going to make a measurable impact on mass shootings and school safety, these type of things. But
I don't think that issue is going
kind
to
of
be
a
resolved
tangent.
in our lifetime.
So I kind of so from a logical standpoint, I agree with you. From a fundamental standpoint, I disagree with you. So I love a tiny government. I don't think that Congress should work better. I think Congress should never work pretty much ever. I think it should be very comparable to back in the day, where you still ran your fucking business at home, and once in a while you went to DC, you guys decided on a few things, and you went back home. And that's it. I don't agree with this. If they're not doing anything, they're not doing the right thing. Like, no, they don't need, half of our spending is just bullshit of shit we don't need. And I think we need to dial that in. It's another issue you and I have talked about multiple times, as far as I think that instead of just printing more fucking money, we need to cut money from elsewhere at minimum that will fund what you want to do. I think it should be somewhere closer to a 2-to-1. You need to cut twice as much money as you use on something else, personally, just so we can rein this thing back in. But from a logical standpoint, I realize that's probably not going to happen. I don't think the American people have the appetite for something like that to happen. We see it time and time again. Anytime someone wants to talk about restructuring entitlement programs, everybody freaks the fuck out. Everyone says we need to cut stuff, but whenever we get to cutting, nobody wants to cut. So that's what I mean by a fundamental standpoint. I disagree with you, but logically, I would agree. I would like more bipartisanship. I don't think that the Second Amendment is one that you're going to get much bipartisanship on with the current Democratic standpoint on it. I think that the Democratic standpoint has entrenched the Republican standpoint, as well as the Libertarian standpoint. I haven't met a Libertarian. Now, that's not saying much because there's not a whole lot of us, but I haven't met a Libertarian that espouses gun control. That being said, I think the Founding Fathers put a very important phrase in there that means that this issue will never be resolved, and that shall not be infringed. So it's pretty clear in the Constitution Bill of Rights, as far as why those of us that are Second Amendment advocates will not give an inch. I just don't think that it's going to happen.
Just to tack onto that, I did read something really interesting the other day about that, and that is about the purpose of the Second Amendment and what the founding fathers really meant for that to be. And there were some very specific interpretations by the courts early on, or I guess rather not early on, but early on with comparison to
now
today, that shifted from the militia ideology over to the individual gun ownership ideology. And you and I talked about this in our earlier episode about how the Fed has basically taken control of the militia, right? And essentially now a unaffiliated militia is, I don't want to say outlawed, but severely limited, right?
We also consider them terrorist organizations for the most part.
And now your National Guard program is where that militia went. So now, based on those interpretations, that's why individual gun ownership has become the target of the Second Amendment rather than the National Guard. And when it shifted to the individual, that's when the federal government took control of the militia. So
what I'll say on that,
if the courts had upheld that as militia versus individual, then militias would have, stayed with the state or the individual, and individual gun ownership probably would have been much more heavily regulated.
So I see what you're saying. I think that the Second Amendment falls outside of traditional government structure as far as the Supreme Court being the ultimate ruling on it, because the tool in which you would overthrow a government is exactly what we're talking about, right? So just because the Supreme Court in 1806 said that, obviously that's not something you can write on your research paper. I just made that date up on the fly, but just because the Supreme Court said that then doesn't mean that Americans at the individual level agree with it. And we all know people, whether or not we are them or not, I don't think matters. The pry it from my cold dead hands people, right? And that is a concern that I think is unique with military, right? Freedom of speech, you can't kill someone with your words, right? You can spur violent acts with your words. Yeah, but you can't scream someone to death, right? Well, you most certainly can shoot someone to death. So I think that's a unique topic that that in common culture we view very similarly to the rest of the laws on the books, right? But I think it's a different thing because it is the largest power that we have against the government. So that's kind of where I'm on that. We have drifted pretty far from our topic of discussion today.
Yeah, and
so
just to as a great segue, I'd like to talk about one moment from the debate that I thought was great, and that was on gun control. Governor Walz talking about how his 17-year-old son witnessed a shooting. And in his rebuttal, Senator Vance went on to, give him basically a heartfelt, message saying,
I have it pulled up here.
That's horrible, and nobody should ever have to experience that. And then they both went on to say that, they agreed with each other and they both thought that the other was really focused on trying to solve that issue. So, again, just another example of the civility that we've been kind of lacking in political discourse. That's one reason that we decided to start doing this podcast.
Yeah, I think it was. That's why I think this was the best debate I've ever seen, just because it gave us some window in what the future could be. Obviously, J.D. Vance is young. This is another thing that I think could help the Trump ticket swing 3 of that 5%, right? So Trump is in his late 70s. JD is 40. Obviously, Trump's also having attempts on his life, and I don't necessarily think that'll slow down. I think he'll just be better protected should he win the presidency. That being said, I think that everyone has it in the back of their mind, the same way that they did with Biden before he got elected. Hey, this guy might not make it all 4 years. And we were right with Biden. Maybe not with him actually being alive, but with his ability to do the job, and that's possible with Trump too. And I think people seeing J.D. Vance being so cordial, being so friendly, being able to have a civil discussion without falling into personal attacks and hyperbole and stuff like that, I think that did a lot. And this is what I meant when I said to you I think this was huge for the Republican Party. I think it showed a way forward. I think a big question for the Republican Party has been what happens after Trump, right? Because Trump is such a once-in-a-generation figure that they're really going to have to reorient their entire party, and I think JD did a lot to do that. I also think JD gave a lot of people that hated Trump, or maybe not hated, but really dislike him. People like me. I mean, I was already RFK, to be completely transparent. RFK is the one that drugged me over to the Trump camp, him and Tulsi. And to be honest, Elon running the efficiency council, I think, is a good idea. He runs multi-billion-dollar companies, so he does that relatively efficiently. He runs SpaceX way more efficiently than NASA, so I don't think that's a bad idea. Anyway, I digress. I think a lot of people that don't like Trump just got another excuse to vote for him, because in the event where Trump, God forbid, can't make it through his presidency, I think they see JD. Before, they just saw the media clips, right, of him being, whether it's impassioned or the Democrat campaign of he's weird or whatever, the couch fucking incident. I don't think that anybody really had an idea of who he was, and I think this really helped highlight that he is a much calmer, cooler head than they originally thought, which could give them a little more confidence to vote for him. So that's another reason I think that this could, 2% isn't 2 or 3% is not a large percentage of the voter base. I think it could have pretty large ramifications. Now, I don't have a prediction on which way I think it's going to go. I think the youth mail-in vote is going to be a hugely different thing than we've ever seen. I think the ease of access for young voters, as well as how political TikTok has been and how widespread TikTok is and how ingrained it is in the culture of the youth nowadays, I think we're going to see a larger youth turnout than we've ever seen. And statistically speaking, younger voters tend to vote Democrat. So I think it's in the air election, right? But I think JD did a lot to rally some of the undecideds.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and honestly, I never looked at it from that perspective before, that certain people might vote for that ticket just because they I mean, to be honest, I don't think Trump is gonna would last 4 years as the president again. One thing that is really floating around the liberal sphere, which I pay attention to, but I don't pay much mind to, is
bounties?
There's a big conspiracy. Well, I guess not big, but I have seen it several times that there's a conspiracy theory that some of these giant Republican donors wanted J.D. Vance to be on the ticket because they either think that Donald Trump is going to kick the bucket during his presidency, and that will put J.D. Vance in the presidency, and then have him as the person in charge, or that they will remove Donald Trump based on inability to perform the functions of office. And
Article 25.
Yep, and install J.D. Vance as the president that way, which in those hyper-liberal circles, people think is, just an insane evil. Somehow people think that J.D. Vance is almost worse than Donald Trump, which is crazy because I've seen the same things said about Ron DeSantis and these other people that were running for office. So I just think I think it's really interesting to follow the extreme right and the extreme left and see the kinds of things that they're saying, because they're very similar.
That's literally why I listen to Pod Save America, because it's one of the more left podcasts that I can listen to. Some of them are just so extreme that I just can't. But I think Pod Save America is pretty far left by almost every rating that I've seen as far as the different media bias charts and everything like that. So in what they say. I don't... That's another thing that I have a problem with as far as the tactics that the Democratic Party has portrayed, particularly the threat to democracy thing. I've seen a lot of, in their hatred for Trump, he's the worst thing for this country. Well, actually, no, J.D. Vance and Ron DeSantis are worse, like you just said. Well, hold on. Is Trump the worst thing ever? Or is Ron DeSantis the worst thing ever? Or is J.D. Vance the worst thing ever? Also, if you think someone is the worst person ever, you think they're a Hitler, you think that they're a threat to democracy, you wouldn't call them to see if they're okay after they get shot. You wouldn't fight for them to be more protected with the Secret Service. Not that I think that they fought for that, but you wouldn't do that thing if they were the worst. So I think this is very clear an intentional polarization of it just for the votes, which I think is deplorable. I think both sides do it to an extent. I definitely think I see more of it out of the left side. I also see a lot more less extreme liberals, because I don't think most liberals are radical. I see more mainstream liberals saying abhorrent things. It's like a whisker away from inciting violence about the right, and not only the politicians on the right, but the constituents of the right. And I do hear it from occasion. So my work environment, for example, is predominantly Republican. I don't think I could tell you a single liberal that I work with. That being said, I've not heard any of them say that they think that Joe Biden should die, or Kamala Harris should die, or that Democrats are evil. Now, they do say that a lot of Democrats are stupid. I'll admit that full-heartedly. But I just don't see that level of vitriol from the voting base of the right that I consistently see in the voting base of the left. And that is scary.
See, now I'll agree with you that the rhetoric from the Democrats has definitely ratcheted up in this election cycle. Well, and the last election cycle, really, but definitely this one. But I have to take a kind of a hard line on the rhetoric from the conservative side. I mean, just look at like the type of yard signs and bumper stickers and slogans that you see out of that camp, right? Like I don't think that it was the liberal camp that started this and is being the ones that are just like totally coming out of left field with this. Like when you have
the rhetoric started with Barack Obama in his second term. So yes, it did start with the Democrats.
Okay, well, we can get back to that and debate that at a later time, because I'd love to see what you think about that. But when you have, you know, people regularly displaying, you know, bumper stickers and yard signs and, you know, all of these things that just kind of espouse hate.
I'll be honest, I haven't seen many from either side, to be honest with you. I've seen fuck Joe Biden. I've seen Let's Go Brandon.
Yeah. I mean, well,
stuff
and
like that.
That's what I'm saying. Like the whole Let's Go Brandon thing. Like that's a perfect example of like
How is that hate?
It is literally. It literally means fuck Joe Biden. And you're just
well, it doesn't literally mean they want to fuck Joe Biden. It means they don't like him and they dislike his policies and they don't like him as a person, perhaps.
It literally means they have a gay man crush on Joe Biden. Okay, no. But I mean, seriously, like, I have seen with my own two eyes multiple trucks with that wrap of Joe Biden, like, bound and gagged in the back of, you know, their truck bed. Like, why do people think that kind of shit is okay?
I honestly haven't seen that, but I would condemn that as well.
First of all, I think that falls under their First Amendment right, and I would never say they're not allowed to do it, but I do think that's a perfect example of, like, why people, you know, why people are getting so fired up. And the other thing is, like, I'm positive that you have seen the I did that stickers on gas pumps. Like, why are people defacing public property to do that?
No, don't say that, because
private property, not public property.
Regardless, the Democratic side was largely responsible for the most devastating property damage riots.
Don't you even start with that. That's not the Democratic Party. That's a protest that came from the liberal side, but it's not okay.
Okay, so it's not sanctioned by the Democratic Party, but neither is putting I did that stickers on gas pumps. So we're talking about left and right constituents at this point, I presumed. I mean,
okay.
I'm just talking about the constituents.
Just to get back around, the reason that I protest so much is because that is a protest based on something that it should not even be along political lines, right? In my mind. But it became highly politicized, just like COVID, you know, police brutality, all of this shit. In my mind, should not be a fucking hardcore left versus right issue. These should be things, again, like I was saying earlier, that people should be coming together to work on. This
I agree with you with the could have, would have, should have, but I'm talking about the specific thing that you said, and I'm correlating it to something else that the other side did of constituency. I'm not talking about the politicians in D.C. at this point. We're talking about constituents. Just like I don't think that the Republican Party sent that vinyl wrap to its constituents that, hey, go put this on your truck. But right, I think we're talking about individuals here.
What I'm saying is that people regularly putting out that kind of stuff and talking about a very specific protest that, you know, turned into a riot in some cases is a false equivalency.
I think that's an understatement of what happened. But I also think that, again, I was comparing that to your defacing of private property comment, which I see a lot of this, and both sides do this, and it's very frustrating as a libertarian to see both sides do the same thing and then cry about it when the other side does it. It's extremely frustrating to me, because you're both fucking doing it, and not you specifically, but you know what I mean.
Well, I deface private property all the time, but not in a political manner. Just because I like it.
I just like drawing dicks on porta potties.
Because it's sterile and I like the taste.
But it's just it's frustrating because they both do it. But my original point was that I think that that has escalated further in the Democratic Party than it has in the Republican Party, and to try to compare "Let's Go Brandon" signs to "The shooter shouldn't have missed. I wish he would have hit Trump." I don't think those are comparable.
No,
Even if you say "fuck Joe Biden," I don't think that's comparable.
I think that any self-respecting liberal would instantly condemn those type of words. I think you see people like that on both sides, and I don't think that anyone that has any business debating these type of topics should be taken seriously, or I guess would take those type of people seriously, and should call that out anywhere they see it. I don't think
100%. 100%. I agree with you.
And I don't see that as a it's not something that I see when I'm
You don't see that in the liberal spaces? I spend a lot less time in them than you do, and I still see them.
Let me say that I see it about equally from both sides. That's what I'll say. I think that in the spaces that I exist online, moderators do a great job of taking down, posts that immediately call for violence. And that's on multiple different platforms. But people that imply that we would be better off, I think that happens in equal measure on both sides. And
I would agree with you if we're talking like, I think it would be better if they weren't the president. That I think happens consistently.
No, I'm
both
saying
sides.
I think it would be better if they weren't alive. For an example,
there's no way you and I could come to an agreement on the fact that both sides do that equally. There's just no chance. I honestly don't know how you... I would love to see some examples as you see them in the future. Send them to me. I'm very interested to see that. But with the things I've seen as far as... So I'd say predominantly my space online tends to be libertarian, followed by conservative, and then I spend about a fifth of my time maybe in a liberal space, I'd say, at most. And I still see a disproportionate amount in liberal spaces than I do in the Republican, and definitely the libertarian side.
Now, to be fair, I'm comparing apples to apples here with the, what you would call radical right, radical left, right? Like the hardcore entrenched left, the hardcore entrenched right, and now I do find myself mostly on the liberal side of in the middle, where it's mostly just casually liberal, not these places where people are making these statements because they think that they're in a safe liberal space. It's just my point is that when you're just casually browsing online, it's not as prevalent as when you're going out and looking for, one side or the other, which is really what I do. I try and look at the extreme right, extreme left. And I find myself getting pissed off at the exact same things on both sides almost every time. So
so I think that my point on that is I do think that happens on the extreme right. I'm sure it does. And I think at the extremes it probably happens comparably. But I think that rhetoric is leaking out of the extreme left into not the middle of the left or the more centralist left spaces yet, but I do think it's starting to drift more in that direction than it is on the right by a pretty marked amount.
I think that's... I think that's really impossible to quantify because...
I agree.
Again,
and that's why I think
where I exist
definitively does.
Where I exist is like casual liberal is what I would say. And obviously, like, my algorithms online want me to be deeply in that,
Which is
that
another issue with our
faction there,
politics is
right?
algorithmics.
Yeah, and again, we can talk about that. I don't know how social media engineering, internet engineering is impacting how people are thinking about things. I'm sure it does, because the moment you stick your toe in that pond, the internet is right there to dogpile you with all that information to either back up the beliefs you already have or try and change your mind. So
Yeah.
but yeah, anyway, before we get right to the end of our time here, I just wanted to go through a couple of points from my notes. Unless you would like to start us off.
No, go ahead.
All right, so I already talked about J.D. Vance talking about earning back people's trust. I thought that was an amazing election strategy thing, and that was exactly what people want to hear from their politicians, right? And that was on abortion. Now, what he failed to do was deliver on a single message in solidarity with the American people, right? And it is about women and about women's rights and bodily autonomy, but there's 100 and some million men in America that also care about this issue deeply. Like I know I do. I don't want my wife and my daughters to have to worry about this type of thing. Kind of getting away from the issue here, but that kind of gives you an idea of where I'm coming from. He did not state whether or not he was against this in the end. Like he said he didn't want to do that right now because he had lost the people's trust. But what he
was against what? I'm sorry.
Against a national abortion ban and against the doing that on the federal level.
I want to be clear that he did say on I believe 2 different occasions that they were not going to be doing a federal abortion ban.
Right, but I watched this clip back a couple of times. He danced around whether or not he would put into effect a national abortion ban, or he would sign it, right? Or I guess Donald Trump would sign it.
Oh, if he would veto it, it was the question, right?
That was I believe the presidential debate. This one was phrased a little bit differently, but
it's about a federal abortion ban after 15 weeks.
Yeah, so they asked him that he had previously supported that, and how does he feel about it now, right? So he danced around that and didn't really give a solid answer, and I think that what would have benefited them from a debate and election strategy was saying, he went through all the trouble of saying, like, we're listening to people, I've changed my stance, and here's why. And he would not say, we will not enact this at a federal level, we'll keep it at the state level. Even that on its own would have, gained some trust, as he said. We already talked about the gun control bullet that I had. I think that they were pretty well.
So hold on, I need to push back on that. That you said he would never support that he didn't say he would not support a federal abortion ban, and he did. He did say that they would not enact a federal abortion ban. So as far as him maybe not verifying his point or his personal beliefs, which I think he did say he was pro-life, which I think is a pretty decent explanation of his view on it. He did say on at least one occasion that they would not support a national abortion ban.
Okay, and that's definitely possible that he did say it. I may have been reading too much into the context of his words around that when he was, really implying that, it was all kind of up in the air, like let's gain back Americans' trust, and then we'll see about moving forward with this kind of, legislation.
So literally
perhaps.
after his question, it says, so she asked the question about the 15 weeks. His exact answer, according to the CBS transcript, is, well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. That was the first sentence out of his mouth in answer to that question. So I just want to clarify the record on that he did say that he didn't support it. But I do agree
Okay.
he did dodge the question the entire time.
Okay,
I agree with that. And I think that was a political strategy to maintain his base.
It is.
So I don't really.
It is possible that since it's been, over 24 hours since I watched that particular part, that I'm kind of blocking out my own biases here and, just discounted that as something that I know to be false. So, I mean, that's definitely something that's up for discussion. I mean, you and I here, we're all about exposing our own biases and,
Yeah.
talking about things, frankly. So
So if you don't mind, I'd like to interject real quick. Just you gave your position
On abortion, I kind of want to give mine a little bit.
yeah, absolutely.
So I think that from a fundamental government overreach position, I am pro-choice at my core. I don't think it's the government's place to interject on that. I do think that abortions are killing a person. I think Bill Burr had a great point about it when he was like, if you mix everything up into a batter for a cake and stick it in the oven, and someone comes out and rips and throws that batter tray across the kitchen, and you're like, what the fuck, man? You just ruined my birthday cake. He's like, well, it's not a cake yet. It's dumb to say that it's not a human life, I think. I think it's pretty clear. But I also think that it's not the government's place to intervene here at any level, but especially not the federal level.
Yeah, no, now I've done a ton of, I guess what you would call philosophical reflection on this topic, and I agree with you. I do think that, and this is probably gonna make me sound a little bit harsh, and I accept that. I do think that you have all of the ingredients for a human life, right? Like you said, a cake. But again, I agree with the science that, if you pull that baby out or that cake, right, it's not going to survive. And that's kind of the cutoff.
But had you not
there.
interdicted, it more than likely would have been, is my point. So without
Yes.
the interdiction, that would have become that.
That
Right.
is true, and now I will say 100%. I will never be in support of a ban that does not have exceptions for when a physician says this is endangering the life of the mother.
I agree.
Or the baby has no viability outside the womb. I think that
I disagree
is-
with that one.
Okay. So, just for a couple of quick facts off the top of my head, a stillbirth has a much higher incidence of complications than a live birth for the mother. So it is inherently much more dangerous.
Yeah,
as
so
well
if
as
the
the
baby's
fact-
already dead inside, that's a different thing, right?
Well-
I'm not saying that that's. I don't think that that's a problem at all, and I also think that falls under the exception for life of the mother. So I don't think that's a beneficial arguing point for the pro-choice movement personally.
Now with things like genetic disorders and disabilities, I think that gets a little bit into the topic of eugenics as well, which we can debate at a later time. But
I think you and I would be pretty aligned on that.
What I think is the big thing from my point of view is kind of a philosophical stance of utilitarianism, which I would love to do an episode about, some of these philosophical views, different moral philosophies and, ethics and utilitarianism. But when you think about compassion and the greater good and kind of merging those two concepts, I think that when you think about a life that is not viable yet and a life that is already existing and has so many more, years to come and so much more to give, the life that is more important to preserve than the life that might be.
So I've also had these philosophical reflections, which is why I came down to my stance of government overreach as far as why I support the pro-choice side of the discussion. But I think that argument you just gave of the life that's not yet viable being less valuable for mankind, I may be misquantifying your statement, correct me if I'm wrong, but is less valuable to mankind than the one that is currently clearly of breeding age, for lack of a better word, reproductive age.
It has nothing to do with reproductive age. It just, I guess it does based on the fact that they're reproducing, right? But no, yes. I don't want to correlate those terms with my.
That is correlated whether you want it to be or not.
Just because
without that person being at that age, they're not able to reproduce, thus they're not able to have an abortion. So just by basic explanation of the fact, that is an important factor of this discussion. Whether or not it's why you think it has more or less validity, it's fine. But it is part of the discussion. Just because without it, there is no discussion, right?
Yeah, okay, and I think we should save this topic for another time because you get into some pretty deep philosophical stuff like the concept of the self and the thinking person and all of those types of things.
Yeah, so I'll cut my rebuttal down in order to save time because I know we still want to get to a little bit of other stuff. So basically, I don't think that that's a valid argument for the pro-choice side. Again, I am on the pro-choice side, so I would like this to be the successful side. I don't like losing, as you well know. That being said, I don't think that you equating the value of one life to another just based on the age of one compared to the other, which is what you would be doing at that point, is beneficial because the argument is always there for, okay, well, that baby has a lot more time on this planet than that adult does.
Now,
I think more time remaining. A lot of the people that are in that, let me finish. A lot of the people that are in the position in which they get abortions,
but Beyonce had
already made. The people that are already in that position have already made a certain set of choices, right? So a lot of the people that that seek out abortions are in the lower income bracket, right? And I'm not saying that there's anything good or bad as far as being a person in that bracket. I'm just stating a fact that most abortions happen in low income brackets. And the likelihood of getting out of one if you're already reproducing out of wedlock is significantly dropped just based on statistics. So the possibility of that baby being more successful and having a more beneficial to humanity career for example, a scientist, a doctor, whatever, is higher, typically, at least by the statistics, than the person that gets the abortion. So I don't think that that is a valid argument to further the cause of pro-choice.
No,
I can see
that's an
how we
interesting
would get
argument
there.
because I think you could definitely make an argument for the exact opposite of what you're saying. Is that I think that that's one of the big things that persuades me in the opposite direction. Is that the people that are most likely to seek an abortion are the type of people that would benefit most on a personal level from terminating that pregnancy, for to put a medical term on it. And again, that comes back to the utilitarianism perspective of the person that is versus the person that might be. The person that is a person that, if they do continue with that pregnancy, will they be able to provide for that child? Not necessarily. Will they be able to provide, food, shelter, water, the basic necessities? Perhaps. Will they be able to provide, a good emotionally and financially supportive household? Maybe. But at its core, I think that the person that's making that choice probably knows best if it's in their best interest or not. And again, you can make the argument for the opposite. Maybe they don't. Maybe they would be totally
I would make that argument, but
and,
for sake of time, I'm not going to.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. A child can be, an unexpected change in your life that changes it for the better. And we have had that discussion, but we'll have it on the podcast one day. But unless you have something else, I'm going to move on to the next one.
Yeah, let's do it.
So with regard to climate change, one of the big things that J.D. Vance wanted to push for was U.S. energy production, and I think that Tim Walz did a fantastic job of rebutting that with, saying that the Biden administration's energy policy has been, very good for shoring up U.S. energy production, both with oil and renewables. A lot of people like to call out the Keystone Pipeline, which was, oil sands, and, really wasn't going to create any more jobs or energy production for the United States than we lost by killing off the Keystone Pipeline. We can get into a whole discussion on the Keystone Pipeline, but
So you think it would have been good had it not been canceled, but now that it's been canceled, it's sunk cost, essentially?
no.
I'm not judging you on that. I'm just trying to understand what you're saying.
Let me reiterate. So first of all, a lot of people have a view of the Keystone Pipeline as being like some giant oil pipeline that was going to just like flow, like a 10-foot diameter pipe of crude oil just like directly into the United States oil reservoirs. That's not what it was. It was low quality like oil sands that takes a lot of refinement, and when we talk about U.S. oil exports, a lot of it is that lower quality oil. So it is something that we could have, made some economic benefit from, but the environmental impact, as well as, just some of the logistical issues, I agree with canceling that. because we have plenty of production here in the United States. I think when people talk about like offshore drilling and drilling into our own oil reserves, they're kind of missing the big picture of the fact that the United States does not have the capability to refine all of the oil that we already extract.
Agreed, and I think that we need to have more permits to allow for the building of more refineries to increase our refining capability. And I say that from the stance that we talked about earlier of inevitably moving towards green energy, right? The nuclear in particular. You know better than most that nuclear energy is expensive, especially the initial infrastructure costs. And I think drilling, refining, and selling as much oil as we can in the short term will allow for that, one, to pay off the $36 trillion that we owe. That's a big, scary thing that not enough people talk about. And it's just kind of like, yeah, that happens. The number goes up. That's just what it does. That's scary to me. So I think using that to pay that down and to invest into infrastructure would be pivotal in order to move towards that renewable or sustainable energy.
Yeah, and I think that that would be a great idea. Unfortunately, we've actually shut down a bunch of oil refineries in recent years due to the fact that our foreign oil I don't want to say dependence, but like just the way that we negotiate our oil trading has made it so that we export more oil products than we import, to the point where, you know, we're exporting unrefined products, and we're also importing more refined oil than we're exporting. I misspoke there. We're exporting more oil. All right, now hold on. Let me go. let me go back and start over from the beginning here. So what we need to do, right, is decrease the amount of oil trading that we do. And that it's been a big talking point in politics. Decrease our dependence on foreign oil, right? If we refined all of the oil that we extracted and used it domestically, we would need more processing plants, more refineries. But we could do it, and it would probably lead to higher oil prices. But if we negotiated with these other oil producing countries to kind of, you know, reduce the reduce our prices fixation on what the external oil market is doing, we would be insulated from, you know, those external fluctuations. So if we distance ourselves from the OPEC countries and we just entirely refined our own oil, we would be able to domestically produce what we need for, you know, internal use. And at that point, really what happens is most likely we would be unable to compete with the OPEC countries, but eliminating our dependence on that foreign oil would almost certainly lead to us how do I say this? Like being able to develop our own renewable resources and have just like energy independence. Now that sounds probably amazing from just, you know, me sitting here in this chair, but we all know that's not how it's going to be. So
it sounds like, so I think we need to move on from this. mainly because I think we're going to get into a globalism debate here.
I was trying not to tie into the global economy, but
yeah, you said like 3 different things where I want to start jumping into a globalism debate. For the record, you tend to be more in support of a global, not governance that you've never given me any indication that you agree with global governance, but you tend
absolutely
to embrace more of a global economy than I do. But nonetheless, I think we should move on from that just because I don't think it's beneficial to the topic, and we're already a little over time. So I want to say one thing that I thought was funny, and I sent a text to you immediately, and I know it was out of context, but I thought that "I'm friends with a lot of school shooters" line was just funny. Obviously, he didn't mean that. I don't know that he's corrected the record yet, which I think is kind of weird, but nonetheless, I thought that was funny. I do think that he had a lot more flounders, and he wasn't nearly as comfortable on the stage as J.D. Vance was, and I think a lot of people have seen that.
No. I think that's totally true, and I believe he even addressed it in the debate. Saying that.
Yeah, when he called himself a knucklehead.
He's no stranger to misspeaking and being taken out of context.
I think that anytime you're calling yourself a knucklehead on a debate stage, you lost. I think that's just bad practice as far as debating.
Yeah, I can see where he's coming from with trying to convey that Midwest dad energy.
And I would get that if it was a more hostile debate. I think it would have been a much more beneficial thing to say, but it wasn't a hostile debate. It was a very cordial debate.
Yeah, and honestly, I think he probably thought that it was going to be a more hostile debate.
I definitely think he did. I think the Democrats thought that this was going to be a slugfest like it was the last time, which I think was intentional of JD to make sure it didn't become that. And I say that because I consider myself an intellectual Marine, right? There's fast Marines, there's strong Marines, there's smart Marines, and I was the latter, not the former, for clarity. But to think that he's not capable of a slugfest is just not realistic. I guarantee you, J.D. Vance could have come with a much higher level of aggression and done that slugfest for the entire 90 minutes. I think he made the conscientious choice not to, and to disarm, and he used the cordial conversation to disarm a lot of what Walz had planned. And you could see that particularly in the way Walz would start to answer his questions. He would start to build up like he was getting to an attack or rebuttal on what he expected J.D. Vance to have said, but he didn't say that. So it was a lot harder for him to rebut or follow whatever J.D. Vance said. You also saw it when he was asked the question first. He tended to get a little more excited. And then when he came back after J.D. responded to him, it was a lot harder for him to have a cohesive and continuous thought pattern. It really threw him off his game, which is another reason I think JD did exceptionally well in this debate. If there was a scale out of 10, I think he did 9.5 out of 10.
I totally agree with that. I think that Tim Walz got shaken a lot more by those rebuttals. He had a hard time keeping it together on that, rebuttal to the rebuttal.
Yeah,
that's where I noticed it most as well. Now, I'm gonna be, for the sake of time, I'm gonna kind of breeze past the immigration topic that I had. I think they traded 1 for 1 on that.
That's interesting because I don't
picture.
I don't think they did. I think that JD was much more specific on that one, and I think where Walz really shot himself in the foot was right at the end, after JD was explaining after post fact check, when Walz said that the border app, the CBP app, was on the book since the 90s. First of all, applications haven't been around since the 90s. What the fuck would you do in the 90s to even pull up an app to do what was being discussed? So
Now,
I don't think that was a one-for-one.
Now,
I also don't think that... Go ahead.
I think you're taking that a little bit out of context, and I actually didn't mention any of that stuff at all because I had a hard time hearing them because of the muted mics. But I think what he was referring to was the particular, piece of legislation or whatever it was that was allowing those particular migrants to be present in America legally. Which was what my next bullet point was about the moderators and that one fact check. I didn't necessarily think that was a fact check on any particular thing. I think that was just I don't know. This is probably my implicit bias talking, but I think that was more the moderators just giving some background on the situation in Springfield based on what's been circulating around online, right? And what they've been saying about what's going on there, talking about how there's, tens of thousands of illegal immigrants moving into Springfield, Ohio.
Yeah, so obviously the Haitians aren't illegal immigrants, but they're also not legal immigrants, for clarity. They have a temporary protective order, essentially. So they're not... That doesn't mean they're in the process of getting their green card. That doesn't mean they've submitted any DACA forms or anything like that. It essentially means they're allowed to live in the country temporarily without needing citizenship and without being deported. It puts them in a middle ground, right? Like kind of a limbo, so to speak. And I think that was mischaracterized by Tim Walz and by the moderators, which is why I think JD's correction of the fact check was so important. But on the immigration thing, another immediate... I trouble saying it's a lie because I don't think Tim Walz intentionally lies. I think he just kind of spews a little bit when he doesn't know his talking point. So when they talked about the cartels using some of those lost children as drug mules, he said the drug mule is not true. Well, we've confirmed it. There's been confirmed cases of the same kid going back and forth across the border multiple times being used to smuggle drugs. So it's just blatantly untrue. And that happened a couple of times within his immigration statement, which is why I don't think they went one for one on that topic.
Yeah, I did notice that particular exchange that you're talking about, and I thought that was kind of a bold rebuttal from Tim Walz to just say that's not true. That that
Yeah.
it
was weird when he said it. I was like, "What?"
These children that are unaccounted for have never been used as drug mules. And I think he even said that's not true. It's been proven or something. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. And I think what he's trying to say is there was some story about how these undocumented children have been being funneled into being drug mules or something, and that particular story was found out to be falsified or something. But
maybe, but that's not what he said.
Without any context, just saying it like that, it just whoa, that's a big swing and a miss there.
Yeah, and as someone who's been arguing my whole life, as you're more aware of than probably anyone besides my mother, if you don't have any sort of confidence behind what you're going to say, just don't say it.
Oh my god.
Because otherwise you're giving ammunition to the opposing side to use against you.
Man,
it's just bad debate.
If I had to debate one person up there, I would not want it to be you, because you would shake me to my core and make me fucking just stew up
I'll tell you
there.
the first thing I would do. The first thing I would do is make an outlandish claim that I know, I don't believe. And I would do it just to get you to circle the drain on that topic while I shit out 18 other things unrelated to that.
And
that
I'm
you
not
can't
even
keep
paying
up to
attention.
because you're just focused about that first thing. So yeah, no, I could easily. I don't know. I love you to death. I could easily beat you in a debate just because
Oh
of that.
my
I know which
God,
levers
dude.
to pull,
Yeah,
and I think of debate as a game, not as a. Not as like a. I don't know how to explain it.
you and my brother are just the worst when it comes to debating things when you're not actually trying to have a civil discussion. Man.
Oh yeah, if I'm just debating to win, dude, it's easy. The hard part is when I'm trying to convince you of it. Then I can't use a lot of those easy win tactics.
And the worst part is that I know, based on the rules
That I'm doing
of
it.
discourse and the rules of debate, that you lost immediately when you said that. But I still have to argue and convince you that you lost, which will never happen. And it's
And
a
at that
futile,
point, you're losing ground because I've moved on.
it's a futile
So
effort.
then you have to not answer other questions, which then loses you more points. So you can circle back to that original thing that you're not going to gain ground on because I'm just full steam ahead on the rest of the debate. So
But
no,
then
that's
what do I
exactly
do?
why I would.
Do I just give up or do I keep going? And
Usually you
Getting
let
more
a big
pissed
sigh.
yep, that's true. All right.
Sometimes
well,
you throw your hands up.
I've got one more thing that I wanted to talk about real quick, and then
Yeah, hit it.
we'll wrap it up. 1 point in favor of the moderators. I think they asked a really good question, and we're not going to talk about whether it was biased or not coming from them to a particular candidate, but they did ask J.D. Vance about some of his policies, and I'm not going to get into the specific topic, but it boils down to, does he think that he can accomplish all of his goals with executive action, or will
That's
he need
the
Congress support?
controls the purse strings type of thing.
Yes. So Congress is ultimately the one that is in control of all of these, sweeping policy actions that either side wants to enact. And as we've seen, executive orders don't really work if you want staying power. So I thought that was a great question to ask in the debate, from the focal point of how are you going to get Congress to basically do what you want. So what do you think about that?
As far as
So
that they would need Congress.
yeah, he
So-
kind of danced around the answer. I don't think he gave a good rebuttal, or not rebuttal, but a good answer on how he would kind of meld those two. I think a good answer would be, we're going to do this type of thing with executive orders, and we're going to work with Congress in this way to enact these sweeping, or I guess not sweeping, but these, permanent types of legislation. But my question for you was, what do you think about that as a question coming from the moderators?
So I think it was a question that would never get an answer from any politician. In this
I
position.
agree.
I think that they can't say anything that would turn the base off from them, because the goal is to win the election. But they can't say anything that would be too harsh to Congress because they need Congress to pass bills, right? So I think it's cool they asked it, fine, but I don't think any politician would be able to answer that question any better or any worse. I do think that there's a lot of current problems that could be fixed by executive order. For example, the biggest one is the border. The executive has almost exclusive power over the protection of our border. Obviously, they need funding for things, but there's something like 90-something executive orders that the Biden-Harris administration wrote strictly to overturn Trump's border policy, which is when we saw the continual uptick of illegal immigration, which has led us to the disaster point that we're at now.
Now,
So I think things like that could be fixed.
I will say, just as a counterpoint, a lot of those executive orders were just, enacting their policy, which, may or may not have overturned Trump policies or, touched on it. It wasn't necessarily
So we can say half, right?
90
45?
Yeah. So
Just for sake of conversation.
Even if you want to cut it in half, say 45 that did something that specifically targeted a Trump policy. I think that was well within their, what they campaigned on.
Sure, but obviously it's led to a bad result.
No, I totally agree. We've talked about the border a lot, and I will say that regardless of how I might argue with you about it, I do think that there is a crisis that needs to be addressed.
Yes, I appreciate that honesty. So I only brought that up in answer to your question, right? So I think things like that, they can use executive power to almost completely clear up. With the exception of building the wall, they would need Congress for that funding, even though most of that funding, I believe, is still in place from when it was passed before. And oddly enough, the Biden-Harris administration has started using that to actually construct more border wall, which they criticized Trump and called him a racist for doing it, which I think is funny. Just from somebody who observes politics, I think that's just a funny thing that they did. And they just kind of tucked tail and they didn't say anything about it because they couldn't from a political standpoint.
I mean, however, I will say that the original border wall never got the funding that it needed.
No, but it did get some.
Yes, it did get some, but I would definitely be reticent to say that that original funding is now funding wall construction to this day.
Well, they stopped wall construction when they came in, so there was still, especially material on location that never got put into place because of that. So they have since continued border wall construction along certain parts. They've just kept it quiet that way. There are reports out on it, but they've just kept it quiet in the mainstream media because they don't want to show their hand, essentially. But when you get into more complex issues, such as the abortion conversation, such as what we're going to do to combat drug cartels in China with the fentanyl issue, which he can do a little bit, they can do a little bit from the executive with tariffs and such, but it'd be kind of hard to executive your way out of that one, as well as the housing crisis. I think that is also an issue that you would need congressional help with, right? So I think it's a mixed bag, to answer your question. I think there's some that they can and some that they can't. Now, I also think that... Go ahead.
I was going to say, from my point of view, I think almost anything that gets done with an executive order should be signed into law through Congress. I
disagree with that.
So executive orders
I think
can
it
be
should
just immediately overturned, right?
Ratified by Congress. Yeah, they can also be ratified by Congress.
Right.
I think that it should...
And that's what I'm saying. Like, Congress should, like, anything that goes through on an executive order should either be signed into law or just dropped, right? Like, it shouldn't be...
So I think that it
something that exists because it's an executive order from 50 years ago.
No, so I agree. But so you're saying you think in order for it to matter, it should be signed in. Otherwise, once they go out, that executive order should drop?
Man, I would have to think about that long
Okay.
and hard. But
Me too.
One really good example of an executive order that I think was very effective was Donald Trump's raising the tobacco age to 21. I think that was a perfect example of something that, people cared about, that the president was like, I can do something about this right now. I'm going to do it. Now, I think that should be, signed into law to make that, written stone, as it were. But
So I think that I'm kind of along with you on this one. I just think that saying that if an executive order is made, it should either be written into law or dropped on the spot. I think that what should happen in an ideal world is an executive order is passed, signed in by the executive, and then a party member of whatever leaning that executive branch has in Congress then writes up a bill in order to enshrine it into law, and then it goes to a vote from the representatives into the Senate and then across the desk in the Oval Office. But I don't think that it should be a blanket. It either gets this or it gets that. But I do think that it should spur a bill conversation in Congress, or there should be an automatic, hey, there needs to be a bill on this in this certain amount of time on the floor. That way we can discuss it. I think that would be good.
No, I agree. And I think those executive orders, like, I'm not saying they should be dropped as soon as the president vacates office, but I do think that those executive order things should be immediately, as you were saying, put to a vote, essentially.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Another question that I think that I was surprised to see them ask Walz because of how biased this news media is, this particular outlet is, as well as how the current rhetoric, it tends to be more predominantly against Trump than for him. And that was the Tiananmen Square question to Walz. I did not expect that. I thought they were going to take it easier on him, and I think that was a good question.
Yeah, that was a just a huge.
It was a blunder on Tim
Walz.
Walz's part too.
It was just that was a mess.
And you could see it. You could read it on his face too. And his answer, his phrasing in the answer, you could tell he was rattled from that. I wish it would have came earlier in the debate, personally, but
yeah, what a knucklehead.
Yeah, and that's the thing too is. I don't think VPs decide elections, but I think that he is the more reasonable one on the ticket. But wow, the intellect I don't think is there. I'm kind of surprised he's a governor of Minnesota and not a governor of a state like I don't know, Louisiana, where the education rate is pretty low. He just doesn't, or maybe that speaks to the position we are in politics currently, that we just, intellect is not really valued in politicians, which I would tend to agree with.
No,
but it was just weird to me.
I don't necessarily think that, his manner of speech and, the way he presents himself and all of that is a reflection of his intellect.
Let me ask you this.
I think
do you think
to get to where he was as a retired soldier in the reserve and
National Guard.
Yep, in the National Guard. Thank you. And all the way up to senator and governor of Minnesota.
So I don't think
that,
I see where you're going with this. I don't think that he's unintellectual for a standard person. I'm talking about the people on the stage and the people on the tickets. Let me ask you this. If both gentlemen took an IQ test on a stage, so we knew they didn't cheat, no notes, no nothing like that, do you honestly think that Walz's IQ would be plus or minus 10 points of J.D. Vance?
Oh, I mean, I think that's impossible to say. I think Tim Walz would probably come out above average. I think JD Vance would also
Again, that wasn't my question.
come out above average. I think JD would probably come above Walz. It's very hard to say in an IQ test. Every IQ test is different. I can talk for hours about how IQ tests are a flawed medium and all of this. But
do you have a better medium? Pick a better medium, and we can have that test. I think you're straw manning this question.
No. I'm gonna answer your question. I think that JD would come above Walz, and Walz would come above average. But I don't think that
I would agree with that. Yeah, that was my statement.
That anyone can assign a number to that type of thing. Especially because of the different variations in IQ tests. I'd love to do an entire episode about IQ tests because it's got a long and interesting history. But
yeah, I just don't think that
I do see your point.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that just as far as intellect goes, JD won that. And I don't think that it's just his ability to public speak, though I think that those two things tend to be paired. Obviously not always, but people of high intellect tend to be able to discuss in-depth points much better than people with a lower intellect, just because they can process at a higher speed, and they can retain a higher amount of information. But again, public speaking is one of the biggest fears of anybody in the world, so there's that.
I would
agree with you that I think
Tim
Walz is higher than average.
I can point you to a study that says that people that have higher than average IQs are actually more nervous in public speaking, and it's theorized to be because that processing speed is too high. Therefore, their brain is moving faster than their language can, come out of their mouths.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, as far as, like I said, going in depth into topics. The public speaking element, I like I said, I caveated that with the fact that public speaking is a big fear and a whole issue. Blah blah blah. I would be interested to see that study, but I don't think it's pertinent to the statement I made, at least, as far as him being able to more eloquently and literately go in depth on a topic, just because of a higher intellect. And I think that made it easier for him to have that discussion because he had more rapid grasp towards his talking points and towards his the numeric stats he wanted to get across. He didn't have to try to remember those. They were just there, so then he could use the rest of his time to disarm Walz throughout the course of the debate, and play more of the debate game than actually having to worry about what he's saying, because he's already retaining that. So now he gets to play the field as it's going. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally understand where you're coming from, and I think that JD Vance is a absurdly eloquent speaker, based on what I saw from the debate. Very unexpected for me.
Let me ask you this.
But I do agree with you on the backgrounds of, both Vance and Walz. Yeah, go ahead.
So, obviously, I don't think you would ever vote for Donald Trump. And that's fine. Fair.
Walz, Vance,
do you think
2028?
No. I would prefer Vance Walz if we had to go with that ticket. And it gets to my question. A big complaint with Donald Trump is that he has zero stately bones in his body. And that's a complaint I have with him, is his manner of speech is not a reflection of how I want my president to speak. I think there's other factors that outweigh it as to why I would be leaning to vote for him over the other, but I don't think he's stately at all. after this election, whatever happens, I don't think the American people or the Republican base give Trump a fourth go at it if he loses. And if he wins, obviously he can't go again. So I think this is the end of Trump. Moving forward, if the left continues down the trail they've been on for the last 4 to 8 years, would you consider voting for someone like Vance, who is much more stately and much more calm under pressure than any of the other people on the field we see today?
Now, I think if J.D. Vance shows that he can embody that leadership that I admire, and he listens to the constituents and shifts rudder when necessary, and he shows that, you know, he is not beholden to, you know, those like billionaire donors, just like every other politician, and he's doing things that are in the best interest of the American people. I think that I would support J.D. Vance on a ticket if, you know, he gets through.
Obviously, he has to prove himself over the next 4 years.
Yeah,
obviously.
exactly.
100%.
Again, like, if he just does the same old song and dance, and you know, I don't think I'd be able to. And I totally understand why you would be, you know, skeptical of Kamala Harris for, you know, exactly the same reason.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to stop it. Yeah. Oh, actually, let's do final thoughts. You want to go ahead?
Final thoughts. I think I kind of gave mine already. I think that J.D. Vance was very good in this debate. Walz also pretty good, for somebody that, you know, said time and time again that he was, you know, really bad at debates. I think he did great, although, you know, you could tell that he wasn't as polished. And again, he got flustered at times, but I think he did a good job of getting his points across and, you know, embodying that, you know, Midwest dad kind of vibe. But yeah, Vance really stole the show with how eloquent he was, and how good he did at, you know, listening and incorporating that into his points.
Yeah, no, I think the only part I really disagree with there is I think you're being a little easy on Walz. I think he had a terrible showing. I don't think it's as bad as Fox News would lead you to believe. Or the Ben Shapiro's. I think Ben Shapiro said he rated him a 3 out of 10. I put him really at a 5 out of 10 probably. Maybe a 4.5, just so he's south of the average mark. But I don't think he had a good showing, really at all. I think he didn't instill confidence in the American people. I think that Democrats should be worried about him moving forward. I don't think they should use him on a ticket in the future. I think they should look elsewhere, to your Josh Shapiro's. Well, I disagree with his politics. I think he's just a better political strategy choice for them. Your Gretchen Whitmer's, things like that. I don't think he's going to stay a national figure unless something crazy, unless Kamala wins and he does something crazy good or whatever the case is. I just don't see it. I think J.D. Vance did exceptionally. I don't know if there was very many things he could do better as far as the debate standpoint goes. I think I disagree with a lot of his policy, not a lot, but some of his policy prescriptions. I also, I know that there's things that his base wishes he would have done, and I've had that discussion the last couple days with some people I know. But I do think strategically, just from looking at a debate standpoint, he did phenomenally. Again, I think that it looks good for the Republican Party. As a libertarian who very rarely gets good candidates on my ballot, I tend to lean more towards the Republican Party, especially as of late. As we move forward, I think that looks that makes me feel a lot better as someone who tends to lean conservatively, that we're not going to see. I don't think we'll see more Trumps. I think we'll start seeing more JDs. And I think that's a good thing, not only for the Republican Party, but for the country moving forward. So I think it was a good debate. I think it was good for the country to see a cordial political interaction for 90 minutes. I think that was a good thing for us to all see. We finally get some break from the insanity. So I think it was good.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think maybe you're being a little bit harsh on Tim Walz. If you go back and watch some of the clips again, he had some really good appeals to the people he was trying to get at. And again, I do think he fell off once those polished bits went by the wayside, with those rebuttals and everything. But I think he did have a good showing. Although
What would you give him out of 10?
Totally agree that he was outshined 100% by JD Vance. Out of 10, yeah, it's not going to be high, but probably a 6.5, something like that.
Really?
Okay. That's balancing debating skill with, debate strategy. He did have that big flub, which, it might knock him down a peg in my book, but otherwise, I think it was good for what they needed. And maybe I'll look back and think that was a really bad rating, but we'll see. But yeah, no, overall, I think that was a fantastic debate, and again, like you said, just what our country needed. And I wish, or rather, I hope that if Trump and Vance do win the ticket, that Vance will continue to support that type of ideal and reach across the aisle and try and work with the Democrats to, solve these problems in a way that everybody will be happy with. That's all I can ask for. In fact, if that happens, maybe I'll be even happier. So, anything else for this topic, Drew?
No, I think we're good. I'm sure it'll come up again
In future conversations, but
As for now, I think we've kicked the dead horse past our time by quite a bit. So I don't want to venture into any other rabbit hole. So I think we should just end it the same way that we always do. And I love you, Mike.
And I love you too, Drew.
Thanks everybody for sticking with us, and we'll see you next time.